Have you ever looked back on your life and thought, I gave too much of myself to people who didn't deserve it? Maybe you trusted someone deeply, family, friends, even a longtime neighbor, only to discover that their loyalty had limits. Maybe they smiled when you were strong, but disappeared when you needed them most. And maybe now, with the years behind you, you've started to realize, peace isn't just about quiet. It's about who you let close, and who you no longer do. See, as we get older, something strange happens. Our vision becomes clearer, not just what's in front of us, but what's inside us and around us. We notice things we didn't have time to see before. A subtle look, a pattern in how someone speaks, how they make you feel after a conversation, lighter or heavier. It's in that clarity that we begin to understand one of life's most important truths. Not everyone deserves your trust, and not everyone deserves your respect. That doesn't make you bitter. It makes you wise. So today, let's talk honestly, heart to heart, about the kinds of people who don't belong in your inner circle anymore. This isn't about shutting people out or holding grudges. It's about protecting your peace, especially now, when that peace is more precious than ever. Let's begin with one of the hardest types to spot, the manipulator. Have you ever known someone who always seemed just a little too kind? The kind who shows up at your door with coffee or compliments, who remembers your birthday, who calls to check in, but somehow you always end up feeling like you owe them something? That's not kindness. That's currency. Manipulators rarely show up with a warning. They come wrapped in charm. They're warm, helpful, even funny. But slowly, they start weaving their influence. A suggestion here, a guilt trip there. Before you know it, you're questioning yourself, apologizing for things you didn't do, walking on eggshells just to keep the peace. I once had a friend, a man I'd known for years, who always seemed to know the right thing to say. When my wife passed, he was there with food, prayers, and company. I was grateful. But months later, when I started saying no to favors, I saw a different side. Suddenly, I was ungrateful, distant, selfish, all because I'd stopped doing what he expected. That's when I realized his support had strings attached. That's how manipulators work. They play the long game. They collect your trust, then use it to shape your thoughts. And by the time you see it, your sense of self has already started to slip. But here's the truth. We may not control how others act, but we can always choose how we respond. We don't owe our mental clarity to anyone. If someone in your life makes you feel small, uncertain, or like you're constantly adjusting your behavior to keep them happy, that's a sign. And it's not your fault. But it is your responsibility to protect your peace. Now let's talk about another kind of drain on your spirit, the constant critic. You know the type. You get a new haircut and they say, "Oh, that's different." You mention a small victory, like organizing the garage or finally going to that doctor's appointment, and somehow they find a way to knock the wind out of your sails. Not with shouting or insults, but with those little comments. The raised eyebrows. The "well in my day" remarks. These people don't offer feedback. They offer friction. They don't help you grow. They slowly make you shrink. I remember someone I used to work with. Brilliant, experienced, and utterly incapable of encouragement. You could bring a well-thought-out idea, and she'd find something wrong with it before you finished speaking. I watched younger coworkers fold in on themselves. Even I began to hesitate before I opened my mouth. That's not wisdom. That's erosion. And it happens in families too, doesn't it? That one sibling or cousin who always brings a cloud into the room. Nothing is ever good enough. No one is ever quite right. And you start to wonder, why do I feel worse after every conversation? Here's the truth. Constant criticism is often a disguise for fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of no longer mattering. People who don't love themselves will struggle to love others. And they'll mask that struggle with judgment. But that doesn't mean you have to carry their burden. You don't need to accept every opinion handed to you. Just because someone speaks doesn't mean you have to absorb it. Let their words pass through you like wind through a tree. Bend, but don't break. You deserve relationships that uplift you, that offer gentle honesty when needed, but never at the cost of your spirit. If someone's truth leaves you doubting your worth, it's not truth. It's projection. Now, before we go further, I want to pause and ask you something. When was the last time you felt truly safe to share a piece of your heart with someone, without wondering if it would be passed around like gossip? Because that brings us to the next person who doesn't deserve your trust, the one who treats your life like a story to tell, not a soul to protect. They always know the latest news, always whispering someone else's business. And at first it might feel fun, even comforting. They confide in you, so you think it's a bond. But here's the quiet danger. If they talk about others to you, they'll talk about you to others. I've seen it happen. I've felt it. That sting when something personal you said in confidence makes its way back to you through someone else's lips. It's not just betrayal. It's exposure. Gossip isn't connection. It's control. It creates a false closeness while keeping everyone at arm's length. And people who live in it often do so because they're avoiding something in themselves. You have the right to privacy, to tell your story when and how you choose. And if someone makes you second-guess that, if they've shown they can't be trusted with your truth, it's time to create distance. Not with anger, but with wisdom. Your life is not for public consumption. Your struggles, your joys, your heart, they deserve safe hands. There's strength in kindness, but there's also strength in knowing when to step back, when to stop explaining, when to protect your peace by protecting your circle. And that clarity, that confidence, is one of the gifts of this season of life. You've earned the right to decide who gets to walk beside you and who needs to be let go. Because peace, real peace, isn't just about avoiding conflict. It's about choosing who and what is allowed into your mental and emotional space. And that choice is yours. Have you ever noticed how quiet it gets when life gets hard? The phone doesn't ring as often. The invitations slow down. The people who once stood close somehow drift further. And in those moments, when you're facing real struggle, illness, grief, loneliness, you start to see things clearly. Especially who's really there and who never truly was. That brings us to a painful truth. Some people only show up when the sun is shining. The fair weather friend. You know the one. They laugh with you at birthdays, cheer you on when things go well, and post pictures with you when life is beautiful. But the moment things turn dark, silence. They're not bad people necessarily. They're just not built for the hard stuff. The discomfort of sadness, the weight of reality, it makes them uncomfortable. And instead of leaning in, they lean out. It might not be obvious at first. After all, they were there for the good times, weren't they? But when the hospital visits begin, or the funeral comes, or you just need someone to listen on a rough morning, they're nowhere to be found. And the hurt of that absence runs deep. Because it reveals something we often ignore. Some friendships are built on circumstance, not connection. That doesn't mean you have to be angry with them, but it does mean you no longer rely on them for the kind of support they're not capable of giving. There's no shame in needing support. But there's wisdom in knowing who to turn to and who not to. Real friends show up when it's inconvenient. They don't have to fix your pain. They just sit with it. And that kind of presence, that's what deserves your trust. But then there are people who show up in every room with charm, energy, and attention. They light up the space. And at first, you feel lucky to be around them. That's the trick of the narcissist. Have you ever known someone who made you feel incredibly special until you stopped being useful to them? That's the giveaway. Narcissists don't build relationships. They collect admirers. They don't see you. They see what you give them: attention, praise, loyalty. And the moment your needs begin to rise, the warmth disappears. You'll notice the conversation always returns to them. Your stories get cut short. Your successes turn into comparisons. Your needs feel like burdens. It's exhausting. Slowly, your sense of self begins to revolve around their mood, their validation, their approval. And here's what's so hard. They can mimic care. They'll ask how you're doing. They'll show concern. But it's shallow. Conditional. They're interested in appearances, not intimacy. You end up performing for someone who never truly sees you. I've known a few people like this in my life. And what I've learned is that you can't outgive someone's emptiness. No amount of loyalty will earn you their empathy. The more you pour in, the more drained you become. And one day, you wake up and wonder where your peace went. That's why we have to remember this. Know who you are, and don't decorate your life with people who don't honor that truth. Narcissists rarely change, but you can change your proximity to them. Not to punish, but to protect. And speaking of performance, have you ever received a compliment that felt just a little too sweet? A little too perfect? That's the language of the flatterer. At first, it feels good. Who doesn't like to be appreciated? We all want to be seen. But there's a difference between sincerity and strategy. Flatterers don't praise to uplift you. They praise to win you. And once they have you, they steer you. It's subtle. Maybe they always know what to say. Maybe they compliment you right before asking a favor. Maybe they cheer you on just long enough to make sure you're on their side. And then, just like that, they're gone. The warmth wasn't real. It was bait. Now that doesn't mean we become suspicious of every kind word, but it does mean we pay attention to patterns. Genuine admiration has depth. It's specific, it's earned, and it's consistent. Flattery, on the other hand, often floats on the surface and disappears the moment it's no longer useful. When we depend too much on compliments, we give away our center. We become vulnerable to manipulation. That's why it's important to accept praise with grace, but not let it anchor your worth. Your value isn't found in what others say. It's found in who you are when no one's watching. I know for many of us, especially later in life, we begin to crave affirmation in a world that often forgets us. We want to be appreciated, remembered, admired. And that's natural. But don't let that longing become a doorway for those who seek to use it. You've lived too much life to fall for sweet words that mean nothing. Let people earn your trust, not with what they say, but with how they stay. Not with how they charm, but with how they show up when it matters. It's okay to outgrow people. It's okay to release connections that no longer feel steady. It doesn't mean you failed. It means you've grown wise enough to guard what's sacred. And what's sacred is you. There's a strange tension that happens when you're doing well. When something finally goes right, when your health improves, when you feel a little lighter, a little freer, you want to share it. You want to celebrate it. And yet, there's that one person whose smile doesn't quite reach their eyes. The congratulations feel hollow. The compliments come with a twist. That's the quiet presence of envy. Now, envy doesn't always arrive loudly. In fact, it's usually polite. It wears the mask of friendship, sometimes even of family. It claps when you win, but its hands are cold. Because beneath the surface, your joy reminds them of everything they feel they lack. Have you ever noticed how your success seems to shrink someone else's mood? How your story gets interrupted by their story? Your good news overshadowed by a better comparison? It's not your imagination. It's emotional misalignment. The envious person doesn't always criticize you directly. Sometimes they simply shift the spotlight. They change the subject. They make you feel like you should hide your light just to keep the peace. But your light was meant to shine, not to blind anyone, but to remind you of how far you've come. And no one, not even someone close to you, has the right to dim that. Envy is rooted in insecurity. It's not about you. It never was. It's about the mirror you unintentionally hold up to someone who hasn't made peace with their own reflection. But here's the thing. It's not your job to fix that. It's not your job to shrink, to apologize for growing, or to carry someone else's emotional discomfort. What you can do is stay grounded. Don't boast. But don't hide either. Be humble, be kind, but be steady. You've earned every inch of your progress. And anyone who truly loves you will celebrate it, not compete with it. Now let's shift gears, because there's another kind of energy that drains just as deeply. Not from jealousy, but from helplessness. From the person who always seems to be the victim. We all know someone like this. No matter what's happening in the world, it's happening to them. Every story ends with how unfair life is, how others are to blame, how nothing ever works out. And at first, you want to help. You feel for them, because compassion is your nature. But over time, something changes. Their weight becomes your weight. Their pain becomes your project. And still, nothing changes. That's because victimhood isn't just a story. For some people, it's an identity. It gives them something to hold on to. If they stay the victim, they never have to change. They never have to take responsibility. And while that may protect their ego, it slowly drains the people who try to help them. You might find yourself offering advice that goes nowhere, encouragement that falls flat. Every suggestion is met with a reason why it won't work. And eventually, you start to feel powerless too. That's the cost. Their helplessness starts to echo in your own heart. But there's a lifeline here. It reminds us that while we should care deeply, we must never carry what isn't ours. As one wise voice once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." You can offer support, yes. You can listen. You can love. But you cannot, must not, sacrifice your peace for someone who refuses to stand. You are not a lifeboat for someone who won't swim. You've worked hard to build your strength. You've earned the right to peace. That doesn't make you heartless. It makes you healthy. And speaking of peace, let's talk about one last presence that often disguises itself as righteousness. The judgmental person. This is the individual who sees the world through a lens of constant critique, who evaluates others not with curiosity, but with superiority. They have an opinion about everything and everyone. And if you spend enough time around them, you'll start to feel like you're on trial. Every choice, every memory, every scar, suddenly open to their commentary. But here's the quiet truth. Judgment is often a mask for fear. When someone is harsh with the world, it's often because they're harsh with themselves. And pointing out others' flaws gives them temporary relief from their own. Still, that doesn't mean you need to sit in their courtroom. You weren't born to prove yourself to anyone, especially not someone who can't see past their own expectations. You're allowed to have made mistakes. You're allowed to have a past. You're allowed to be human. You don't need anyone's approval to exist fully and honestly in your own skin. We must not let others' harsh opinions shape our inner world. What someone says about you, especially when it's delivered with coldness, says more about them than it ever will about you. You can disagree without defending. You can walk away without explaining. That is your power. And maybe you've needed this reminder. Maybe it's been a while since someone looked you in the eyes and said, you don't have to keep giving pieces of yourself to people who misuse them. You don't have to keep explaining your heart to people who've proven they don't understand it. You don't have to keep trusting people who haven't earned it. Your life, especially now, is yours to shape. Your energy is sacred. And your peace? Non-negotiable. We've all been hurt. We've all trusted the wrong people. But the gift of age is perspective. And with it comes the chance to live the rest of your life on your terms, with clarity, courage, and the quiet strength to say, no more. No more giving endlessly to those who only take. No more accepting blame that isn't yours. No more shrinking for the sake of others' comfort. You get to choose who sits beside you, who speaks into your spirit, who deserves a place in your world. And that's not selfish. It's self-respect. Sometimes we don't notice it happening. The slow drain. The way someone's presence makes us question ourselves just a little more. The way a conversation leaves us tired instead of lifted. It's not always loud or obvious, but over time, the wrong people in your life don't just wear you down. They wear away at your peace. And yet, there's something beautiful about recognizing it. About looking at your life, your relationships, your circle, and finally seeing them not just with your eyes, but with your wisdom. You've walked through joy, through heartbreak, through years of change. And now, here you are, with the right to decide who gets access to your heart, your time, your story. It's never too late to draw that line. Because trust isn't a casual thing. It's not just given, it's earned. And respect? That's sacred. When you give it to someone who doesn't value it, it's not only wasted, it hurts you in return. Maybe you've given your trust to people who used it as leverage. Maybe you've stayed silent in the face of constant criticism just to keep the peace. Maybe you've shared your story with someone who later passed it around like gossip. Or maybe you kept giving love to people who disappeared the moment life got heavy. But here's what I want to tell you. You don't have to keep doing that. You are allowed to change the way you relate to people, even if they're family, even if you've known them for 40 years, even if they helped you once long ago. The past does not entitle someone to your present. This is your time now. To choose peace over performance, depth over drama, truth over obligation. It doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means you love with clarity. It means you hold compassion in one hand and self-respect in the other. It means you stop making space for anyone who consistently leaves you feeling smaller, weaker, or unsure of yourself. We don't control others. We control ourselves. We control our boundaries, our reactions, our circle. And in that circle, there should only be those who truly honor your presence. Not because they need something from you, not because they fear your silence, but because they see you and love you as you are. And here's the truth that might feel hard at first, but will set you free. It's okay to walk away, not in anger, not in resentment, but in peace. Because your energy is no longer for convincing others of your worth. It's for creating the life you deserve in this moment. You don't need to explain your boundaries. You don't need to justify your silence. You don't need to defend your distance. When someone repeatedly proves they don't value your trust, your time, or your truth, your quiet decision to step back is enough. And if you're sitting here right now thinking, "But I don't want to be alone," let me gently remind you, you are not alone. You have yourself. You have your voice. You have your strength. And you have countless others, maybe even right here in this community, who are walking the same road. People who know the value of inner peace, who've stopped chasing approval and started reclaiming their power. When you stop trying to hold on to everyone, you make space for the right ones to walk in. And when you stop giving yourself away to those who only take, something beautiful happens. You come back to yourself. The real you. The steady you. The you that doesn't need to perform, or explain, or apologize for choosing peace. So if no one's told you this lately, let me be the one. You are worthy of honest love, of quiet respect, of steady companionship. You are allowed to outgrow people. You are allowed to protect your joy. You are allowed to choose peace over obligation. And you are stronger than you think. Thank you for walking through this journey with me. If anything we talked about today touched something inside you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your story could be the very thing someone else needs to hear right now. Don't be afraid to share it. If this video gave you clarity, gave you strength, or even just made you feel a little less alone, please give it a like. Subscribe to the channel. Join us as we continue building a life of purpose, strength, and quiet resilience. One boundary, one breath, one brave step at a time. because your light is needed, and your peace is worth protecting. Here's to living with wisdom, walking with strength, and choosing only the voices that help you grow. I'll see you in the next video. And until then, protect your peace and keep your light strong.